Hello, my name is Rob Edwards. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. And you join me in a brand new world, a world where the television series Wheel of Time has begun. 3 episodes have been released, 3 episodes have been watched, and this video is going to be my review and breakdown of episode 1, Leave Taking. There will be spoilers throughout for episode 1, but not beyond. I don't want to talk about episodes 2 or 3 in this video, and nor do I want to talk about what happened in the books beyond what we see in episode 1. I'm also going to attempt not to use the phrase "in the books" more than 3 times in this video, not counting the 2 I've already said. The one saying that I wouldn't say it, and the one before that. So it's going to be impossible. But I want to talk about this episode, so let's get to it right after this. So I'm not going to break this episode down beat for beat. I want to talk more broadly about things that I spotted and things that interest me from this episode. And I want to talk about sort of 5 categories of things. We'll start by talking about character, then a little bit about structure and pacing, a little bit about world building, my take on the effects, and then we are going to round out the section with my take on some of the changes that we saw going on. Let's start with character, because this is probably the thing I've got the least to say about, because to my amazement, but delight, the characters that we see on screen, certainly from the main core cast, are completely recognisable. Every character, with possibly one slight exception, is just how I always pictured them. Rand is Rand, Egwene is Egwene, Nynaeve is Nynaeve, and all the rest. Yes, characters have been aged up a little bit, but as I've said a couple of times before, that does not bother me at all. It makes sense to me. The one character who is a bit altered is Matt. And if you remember, if you watched my top 5 characters from the Eye of the World, you will know that I love Matt later in the series. But in Eye of the World, and maybe even Great Hunt really, he isn't really a character in his own right. And I actually think the changes that they've made here to Matt's backstory allow him to have a little bit more personality, to be a recognisable character, not just a sort of cutout in the background. And okay, he's a bit of a rogue, a bit of a thief, a bit of a pickpocket, and that might be a bit kind of... I don't know how I feel about that necessarily, but he has a strong sense of family, a strong protective bent, and that is certainly a reflection of the Matt that we meet later in the series as well. So I'm happy. I'm happy with all of the main cast characters, really. Although I have one note for the changes section later on, particularly about Perrin. Structure and pacing. This, I think, is probably the weakest point of episode 1. I think that they made the decision, with only 8 episodes in the series, that they wanted to get out of the 2 rivers by the end of episode 1, and I completely get that. There is a lot of story to cover in the remaining 7 episodes, so absolutely they wanted to get out of there by the end of episode 1. But it meant having an awful lot of stuff getting in there right at the start, and it really made the whole episode feel just a little bit choppy, a little bit fast-paced, and not in a good way. I mean, fast-paced can be great, but just a little bit kind of, oh, we're doing this, no, all over the place. And it's not really until later episodes where things get to catch their breath and we really start learning more about our characters beyond the obvious, essentially. One of my least favourite things about the pacing really is around the end, which is weird because actually one of my favourite things about the pacing is also at the end. So there's a bit of a confusion on this one. Essentially, the decision to leave with Moiraine, the decision to depart the 2 rivers, the 4 of them take it to travel with Moiraine and leave, just felt really rushed, particularly given Rand had just finished essentially shouting down Moiraine for having possibly brought the Trollocs on the Two Rivers. Although that in itself was a bit odd, having just come straight on the back of Moiraine healing his dad. As I say, all of that compressed into that short amount of time resulted in a very strange and choppy feel to the end of the episode. But I loved ending on Moiraine's narration. And anyone who has read those books, that's not the phrase, anyone who has read the books will recognise that narration immediately. And it really helps sell that this is not the beginning, but a beginning. I'm quite torn about the world building they achieved in this episode. Some of it is great. Some of it is great and different from what we know in the books. Some of it is very poor and different from what we know. So this first one, this one's a really difficult one to talk about. But what I will say is that although I love the fact that we get so much emphasis on strong, important women in this show, in the Two Rivers specifically, I would have liked to have also had a bit of evidence of some strong, important male characters within the Two Rivers as well. Tam, I suppose, Tam's fair, but there's no evidence really that he has a leadership role within Two Rivers. What am I talking about? Well, in the books, damn it, in the books, that counted as one. In the books, that still counts as one. We have the Women's Circle, and we have the mayor and the village council, basically. And the Women's Circle and the town council pretty much at odds all the time. They seem, in the books, damn it, essentially to be of equal power level, equal influence in the town of Two Rivers. And it does mean that we get voices from both sides when the question of the kids, as they are in the books, leaving. We don't get any of that. We get the Women's Circle go front and centre. And I have no problem with seeing all of that, but I would have liked to have seen a counterpoint from the male side of things as well. I've watched a couple of other reviews and breakdowns of this series, and it seems to me that the opening section, particularly the Reds chasing down these two guys who turn out to be one guy, is really unpopular. And I don't get that, because I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was brilliant to see what happens to men who can channel the power. Not only are they chased, not only do they get gripped by madness, not only do we see this sort of hatred and venom that the lead Red Sister puts at this poor guy before they do whatever it is they do to him. I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was really effective. And more than that, as we see Moiraine and Lan turn and leave, we get that very shorthand saying that Moiraine's journey has been an ongoing one. She's not gone straight to the Two Rivers. We also get, as this scene ends, it pulls back and we see the sort of spires of stone, which look very suspiciously like, skyscrapers, perhaps calcified with time. And for those of us who know, that is quite an important element of world building in the world of the Wheel of Time. Two other bits of world building which didn't really work for me, and I'm really hoping that I'm not coming off as negative this because I love this episode. Generally, I did, but just a few nitpicks things really. Again, I did a video recently, which I'm really happy with, where I talk about my delight about the way characters swear in the Wheel of Time. And again, if you want to check that out, have a look at the card. We don't get it. I mean, we get a little bit of people talking about the light and light bless me or whatever. We don't really get much else. And Matt in particular, I was really hoping to see to see a bit more of particularly from Matt. He's quite sweary, and I'm quite right. That's Matt. But I was rather hoping for a bit more Wheel of Time sweary and a bit less modern day sweary. And I found the whole thing just a bit disappointing, if I'm honest. It doesn't spoil the show for me, but I am a little disappointed by it. The other word, which it only gets used once during the entire show, but it just sort of took me out of things for a moment. I went, is that really right? Because what we see here for the Festival of Beltane, for Egwene's admission into the women's circle, we see there's a lot of spirituality in the Two Rivers, and perhaps a little more emphasis than we get in the books. But we see a lot of spirituality, and I really love this kind of ritualistic lighting of the lanterns to guide loved ones back to when the wheel spins them out again. They will find their way home, which I really thought was quite beautiful and quite lovely. But then when we see Nynaeve cleaning up the ritual cave when she's confronted by Moiraine, Moiraine says something like, "And here I find you cleaning," and Nynaeve says, "This cave is sacred." And the word sacred to me has less to do with spirituality and more to do with religion. And that really struck my ear as a bit wrong, a bit strange. Because essentially there isn't religion in the Wheel of Time world. There is, again, the strong spirituality, and there are certain factions, more on them next week, well, probably tomorrow's video, where there are people with religious fervour. But in terms of having a religion, that's not really Wheel of Time for me. I want to talk about effects. I want to talk about effects for the show, and for the most part they are amazing. The Trollocs look fantastic, the Fade looks great. I am not a fan, I'm still not a fan of the way they are doing channeling. And actually, it's not the small stuff. The small stuff's quite nice and neat, and I have, the sort of wisps that get weaved. Fine. But when Moiraine is fighting the Trollocs in Two Rivers, and she is surrounded by the weaves that she's creating, and we see her lit with this bright light, it actually looks really dodgy. And she's not matte painted onto the scene. She's there in the scene. If you watch the behind the scenes video that they released alongside the episode, you can see that she's basically lit with this bright white spotlight. But it does make her look apart from everything going on around her. And I found it really distracting. And yes, people talk about how it's amazing how Lan and Moiraine act together as one. And it is quite nice to see the two of them sort of working around each other during that fight. But Moiraine doesn't look like she's really there. And there's this weird choice of this bright white spotlight on her really pulls her out of the background and makes it look like a bad Photoshop, even though it's not. Let me get now to talking about the changes. They had a lot of ground to cover in this episode because they were so determined to leave the Two Rivers by the end of episode 1. Again, a decision I entirely support. We do lose a lot of nuance from the Two Rivers. And as I said, it's particularly at the cost of a lot of the male characters within the Two Rivers. And I've said enough about that. I'm not going to say any more about it. It doesn't spoil the show for me, but it does mean that we get to know some of the supporting cast a little less. Of course, our main cast are all now leaving the Two Rivers, so when we will see the people from their home again, if we see the people from their home again, well, I'll leave that as a discussion for other channels, because that talks about spoilers of things yet to come. Or do they? So it's really weird that they've cut out so much, but also taken the time to add new things in. Some of which I loved, some of which I did not like so much. I do not mind that the characters have been aged up. I've said this several times, and probably even in this video. I have no problem with that, and I do have no problem that Rand's and Egwene's relationship have moved on. And how do I feel about Perrin being married? I suppose I don't feel terribly much about... that feels like a Perrin thing to be, certainly. But then to have his wife being killed off so immediately, because she has to be, because he can't leave the Two Rivers leaving his wife behind, that would just be weird. But that's just bad. It just looks bad. All the stuff that they've done about trying to emphasise women as being important in the Two Rivers, and then we fridge one of them, essentially. We create a woman who's only there to give angst, in this case, to a male character, and that is not doing her any service at all. It certainly sets up one of Perrin's ongoing dilemmas, I suppose. One of the things that bothers him going forwards. There is a different setup for it in the books. This is possibly an easier shorthand, but that doesn't make disposing of this woman in this cavalier way any more of a good story beat. Okay, so there we go. I've talked for long enough now, probably more than long enough, given how I'm trying to talk so carefully around some of the subjects here. Where am I on the rating for this episode? I think, on the whole, I like more of it than I don't like. In fact, a lot more than I don't like. There are things which bug me about this episode, and they are going to bring the score down by at least a couple of points. So I'm torn between 7 and 8, really, I guess. Let's give it a 7.5. Let's call this a 7.5 out of 10 for me. That feels about right. That feels about right. There is a lot of stuff that really did it for me, that really worked for me. But there are things that I missed, that they had to cut out. There are changes that they made which really do feel wrong to me. And while I am fully behind this being a different turning of the wheel, and that changes are okay, I am allowed to not like some of the changes, even though I am behind the need for making changes in the first place. Anyway, that's it from me for episode 1. I will be back later in the week, maybe tomorrow, maybe Wednesday, with my breakdown of episode 2. So I will catch you next time. Cheers.